Ryan.
Today we are learning basketball with Ricky O'Donnell. Can't wait to hop in. A writer, editor, associate director of programming with SB Nation. He covers every level of basketball. If you like grassroots, if you like the draft, if you like college, if you like pro, like Ricky's out here covering on it. He's got some ideas on all of it, and I can't wait to dig into some of those levels. But before we do, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. I've been enjoying the podcast, and you've had a lot of awesome guests. So I'm flattered that you would ask me to be on because I think most of the people you have had on are just some really good basketball guys. So appreciate you inviting me, and been a fan of your work for a long time.
Hey, appreciate the love. I mean, you are well deserving. One of those great basketball minds that just covers expansive different levels, and it's not every day that every person is able to cover so many different levels and cover it well, and like have thoughts that actually show that they're watching the game at all these different levels. So I'm excited to dig into some of it with you here. We're thinking about maybe hitting on Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma, Kasparas Jakucionis. Well, I'm going to try to pronounce his name. Shout out to him if I mess that up. That's if you've been following the pod, pronunciations are not my strong suit, but we're enjoying his game obviously, and these are some guys that might be moving into some top 5 pick conversation, or at least lottery bound for sure. I think so. Excited to hear what you think about their games. And then we got to hit on your Bulls and what they're up to, their season so far. Will their stars kind of be on the way out? Will they keep building around them, keep this ship going? We'll see what the Bulls end up doing. And we're fresh off Christmas Day too, so excited to maybe hear a couple of your thoughts on your takeaways from one of the best NBA days of the year. But why don't we hop right in to that Christmas Day and just kind of hit on it real quick, get it out of the way. And it was so much fun, just all these different games, Wemby and Mikal Bridges trading 40 points a piece to start things off. You had like Kyrie Irving going for that late fourth quarter comeback that didn't quite pull out the Mavs. Luka went down with an injury, but Kyrie just showing off his magic. I'll let you go first before I name off everything. Did you have a favorite moment, takeaway, or just any thoughts on NBA Christmas this year?
Yeah, I think the slate got off to a great start, obviously, with that Knicks Spurs game. And it was so cool to see Wemby playing in the Garden on Christmas Day. You got to think for a lot of like casual fans, I feel like Christmas is sort of like the unofficial opener of the season. Like when a college football fan might watch the NBA for the first time, a lot of these people have maybe never even seen Wembanyama play before, considering it's only his second year. The Spurs are rarely on national television. So to see him go into Madison Square Garden, and like you could tell from the moment he walked out onto the floor that it was going to be on, he's like a head taller than Karl Towns, first of all, which is just wild as someone who's, seen Towns throughout his career. He's probably pretty close to a legit 7-footer, I would guess. And Wemby's like a head taller than him. And it was interesting, like, part of the reason I like that game so much is that while I haven't like waded into the waters of like why NBA ratings are down, why, the discussion around the league is so negative, whether it's online or on TV or whatever it is, it did feel like that game sort of like smashed a lot of the narratives that have been talked about the league in bad faith. You could say that, I guess NBA players don't play hard, right? Well, there was Josh Hart getting multiple loose balls on the final possession to basically will the Knicks to a win with nothing more than like high motor and effort. You could say the mid-range is dead. Well, there's Mikal Bridges splashing mid-range shots from all over the floor at a ridiculous clip. And then, you could say that the NBA doesn't have a torchbearer in the post-LeBron, post-Stephen Curry era, whenever that comes. And we'll see if the league can get Wembanyama or can get like fans to actually care about Wembanyama beyond the diehards. But man, if you just watch him, like his game just resonates at such a natural level. Like I was watching that game with my dad, who's a casual NBA fan, but mostly cheers for the Chicago Bears and otherwise, isn't like super invested in anything going on in sports. And my dad was like, holy cow, I've never seen anything like this. Like this guy is just sort of like super flexible and hitting these goofy shots. And he took 16 threes and he's 7'5". He made a bunch of them. So I just really like that game as like sort of a myth making opportunity for Wembanyama, and just as a game that I thought shattered a bunch of like the false narratives with the league. So, if you got beef with the NBA, I think it's totally fair, and certainly enough people have said it at this point that I think it deserves like serious consideration. Uh, but at the end of the day, I mean, if you like basketball, there was some damn good basketball on Christmas Day, and I couldn't stay up late enough for the nightcap over here in the Central Time Zone, but the Warriors Lakers game was just phenomenal. To see LeBron and Steph like both delivering uh, on a national TV game with everyone watching them, just like that late fourth quarter rally where they both hit threes. Then Reeves schools Andrew Wiggins on an island to get the game winning bucket. I just thought that was great television. To have those two guys go up against each other again, and you could just tell like for everyone playing in these games that it meant a lot to them. And it would be easy for the players to be like, well, I don't want to work on Christmas. I miss my family. I'm like disappointed that I have to do this. But it seems like they all took a lot of pride. Even like Embiid was a game time decision, right? And like I think he had 27 points in 31 minutes. Like that was about the best we've seen Embiid look all year. It seemed like a lot of guys had a lot of pride for the Christmas Day games, and I thought it produced some great stuff.
Yeah, some great points there. NBA Christmas definitely feels like the coming out party for the season for the casuals, but also just that like you said, the proudest day of the year for the players. Like that's their day to show like everyone gets up for it. Like it's basically a playoff game in the middle of the season where like everyone, even you see a Russell Westbrook like playing out of his mind in the last game of the night, just clearly trying to put on a show because they know everyone is watching. Like there's rarely as many eyeballs on the game as that moment. And that you hit on my moment that I was my favorite part was LeBron and Steph still delivering like entertainment, prime time value, a clutch sequence of back-to-back threes. Steph hitting unfathomable shots with that like relocation corner three over LeBron, and then he earned the double bang from Mike Breen plays later with another three off of one of those Draymond linebacker or defensive line or offensive lineman, I should say, screens, opening it up for him for like a handoff or off screen or whatever the heck it was, run around Draymond. Like, man, like they delivered, and the idea that they're still delivering 10 years basically after the finals, like 2015 NBA finals, like we're a few days out now, checking my fake watch here of 2025. Like, it's just wild that they're still delivering that level of, epic performance, that drama that NBA fans love to see. And you hit the nail on the head with Wembanyama. Like, he is just delivering things we've never seen before. Like the way Evan Gualberto, who was on the pod, described Manu Ginobili, where he'll do something you've never seen it before. That's what I thought of watching, Wembanyama on this game, where I think you highlighted in your piece on SB Nation, maybe Nikias Duncan broke it down, where like he had this give and go play on the baseline where he like passed it out, cut baseline, and then caught an alley-oop spinning drop-in layup. Like no one's ever done that before. Like what are these moves that he's inventing, moves on the fly with that fluidity, the agility, the flexibleness that you describe, flexibility that you describe. So like just an incredible talent. And like you said, hopefully at first you might look at the standings and be like, as a casual fan, why are the Spurs playing on Christmas? And then you wake up and see him in the Garden. It's like, oh, that's why they're playing on Christmas. Like this talent needs to be marketed, like you said, as the next big thing, because kind of like when LeBron entered the league, like we've never seen anyone like him, and this is one of those talents that is living up to the hype. Like he's putting up monster box scores. I think the first like one of four players ever so far this year to average 25 points, 10 boards, and 4 blocks, and he's doing it while just scratching the surface, shooting all these threes, like you said. Like he's clearly not just a monster on the post. He's more like a taller Kevin Durant that can just hit tough shots from anywhere, and like should be appreciated for that skill set. So just another incredible NBA Christmas. NFL got to get off the block. Find your. You have every other day of the year. Like let the NBA have this one. But just too much fun. for NBA Christmas. And before we dive into some of these other topics that we hit on, I kind of want to hear about your process and like, your journey in basketball, how you got to where you are, what your process is like writing, coming up with stories, like what you're looking for and everything when it comes to kind of the creative process of working in basketball media.
Cool. Well, I've been blogging for a long time. I started my own blog in college in 2007, covering Chicago sports. That was called Tremendous Upside Potential, which was an ode to an old, or a nod to an old Bill Simmons reference from like way back in the day, right? So I did that for a little bit, and then I got an internship at the Chicago Sun-Times, and I was covering high school sports there. Uh, there's some good players, through the area at that time. Like Jabari Parker, that was early in his career. He was probably like one of them, but it was like the year after D Rose when I really got into it. But I kind of like got my feet wet doing that in the industry, kept like writing about the professional sports myself. And then I got to SB Nation. I was running the regional SB Nation site. And then they sort of like brought me into the national SB Nation site. I started doing college basketball recruiting because no one was doing it. And I started doing mock drafts because no one was doing them and covering the mock drafts. And it just kind of evolved from there. And I'm like so lucky to have a chance to do this as my full-time job. And my role has changed a lot over the years. Right now, I manage the NFL writers and I write a lot of the, like most of the NBA content and the college basketball content, because that's kind of just what you got to do if you want to, survive in a very rough media field. But it's been awesome. I do feel like my coverage probably isn't as good as it used to be because I have different responsibilities at work now. And part of me is like, main priority is to perform well in my job, almost more so than like writing the best possible stories I can write. Like that's not really the main focus of my job anymore, unfortunately. So, I feel like my role has changed a bit, but I still write a lot of stories about basketball, college hoops, NBA. I covered the men's Final Four this year, which was awesome. I've been trying to get out to, more games for basketball at every level. I just covered the Notre Dame UConn women's game where I drove to South Bend just because, that was an awesome matchup of two top 10 teams. And I guess that's just sort of how I got to where I am right now and like what I'm doing at the moment. But it's definitely, I'm still trying to like have my foot in covering the NBA and then covering sort of the pipeline as I always have from sort of the elite high school guys, which would fall under like the college basketball recruiting bucket into, your one and done college year or your college seasons, then into the NBA. Like those games are more connected than I think a lot of the media covers it like that. Like it just seems like there's college basketball guys, there's NBA guys, or there's like grassroots recruiting people. And really like it's all just very connected. Like the top recruits become the top college freshmen become the top NBA prospects. And I think it's important just to like watch these players over a number of years to sort of see how their games develop and to sort of see like the broader trends of the game and like where it's going. So that's something, I hope to continue to do. And maybe not my main focus at work anymore, but I'm very, very lucky, obviously, to still be doing it for my job all these years later.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I'm super curious how you're able to kind of balance that entire pipeline because, like, when I started getting into more of the draft scouting work, and I always kind of I had to correct myself. I used to view it as like, college is the ultimate stage before the pros, and this is where the best prospects prove themselves, and not to the degree of like Luca has to prove himself in the Big Ten or what or the SEC or something like that. Obviously, he was an all-time prospect over there. Nothing to do with that. More so, just that why do we care how good a 13-year-old does against his peers? But when you really look at it and back up the full scale and kind of realize how every game is a sample size, or sorry, every game is a data point, that the 30 game college season is really just one smaller sample size compared to every single year, especially in high school, on the way up to that point. And you add the fact that colleges, you're playing often a lot of like older college players that are not necessarily in your age group that might have a little more physical experience, that physical development and experience that kind of like might be hard to compare pro prospects to when they're almost men amongst boys and that in those physical attributes versus in high school you have guys that are actually playing against their age group for the most part. And like you said, they play the same prospects and peers, especially nowadays, these higher touted prospects like coming up, you got Darren Peterson and AJ DeBonsa and Cameron Boozer, Cooper Flagg. They've all played each other a few times in high school before they all play each other again. Obviously, Cooper's 1 year before them, but before they play each other again in college going forward. So we'll get those marquee matchups down the line, but these games matter too, and these are all like a step in their journey, their development, kind of their way to earn those rankings before they get to college and kind of like prove themselves multiple times in front of different eyeballs in different areas. And I think it's super important to evaluate prospects in different contexts and being able to see them in different roles on different teams. Like you got to weigh the key buzzwords, I like to say, like opportunity and role and situation and schemes and matchups and all those things. So back to kind of the first thought there, how do you balance watching all this game tape and building out a full pipeline for an evaluation for a draft prospect, and how early do you start in their career to do that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, but what you really want is just all the data you can get. And I think that that's really what's changed in the time I've been doing this. First draft I covered, I was, putting my hand to the sky to interview Rudy Gobert at the draft combine. I think that was 2014 or maybe it was 13 maybe. Anyways, but yeah, so I think that like, doing it back then to now, I think the thing that's just changed is now you have more data. And that data just really has a way of cutting through the narratives. Like, is this guy actually, someone who can handle a jumbo initiator role? Or then you see his, assist to turnover ratio, or just like any of the data that you can get like that. And it sort of just like shines a light on some of those false narratives, I think. So I would say that's been the biggest thing that's changed. In terms of when I start paying attention, I would say like summer after sophomore or junior year. I don't get like really into it early in their high school careers, just because usually there's more compelling stories to talk about and write about, especially if you're like at the part of the year where it's the grassroots level. I feel like when you're in your rising senior year, that's sort of both when it's the most meaningful in terms of your production, and also just like when it's your time to sort of like make your statement as a player and have all your improvements over a few years come together. So I would say probably, yeah, like 1 or 2 years of high school, and then certainly the college sample or pre-NBA sample, whatever that is, international. Used to be the G League, but not anymore. And yeah, just try to put it together. So I would say the main thing is just try to think like what are these players really good at, and how does that translate to the NBA? And I think like it's interesting because we always get the playoffs right before the draft, and the playoffs seem to decide where the league is going schematically and just like from a roster building standpoint more than anything else. Like something might work in the regular season, and you think that this might be like a bankable trend going forward, and then it gets exposed in the playoffs one way or another. So I definitely try to think like I try to ask myself more like what are players good at more than what they can't do, and then what kind of surrounding context they would need to get that role and thrive in that role in the NBA. Now, of course, not everyone gets their perfect context. And I wrote a column on this. You actually reached out to me about it a few years ago on Aaron Gordon, and watching Aaron Gordon from the McDonald's All-American game to his one season at Arizona, getting drafted as a top 5 pick into the Orlando Magic, and then sort of eventually finding, sort of the perfect role for him next to Nikola Jokic on a Nuggets team that won the 2023 championship. And I know that you did a follow-up piece to that was really good as well. So, it's just like a lot of guys don't get that perfect match of like time in their career with the opportunity, with the ideal team role. So especially if you're a role player, you have to be more well-rounded and think that like, oh, my job is to amplify a star more so than, have a perfect team context around me. Just a few things I try to keep in mind when making my evaluations on these guys. And I think, look at every data point you can get really is helpful in it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of, what skills translate to the NBA. What like he this player have like three clear NBA level skills that are going to translate, and is that a role that can be defined in the NBA? Because outside of the superstars who are kind of free to just roam around and do whatever they want as long as they produce like superstars on one or both ends of the floor, everyone else pretty much has to have very few holes in their game to survive a rotation, especially come playoff time where they might get picked on because now it used to just be maybe 3 and D. Now it's like they have to dribble, pass, and shoot to attack a closeout, and they have to defend their position and maybe two other positions pretty well too. And beyond just man-to-man coverage, maybe relocate on offense and rotate on defense and do a little bit of everything there. So that is a great point, and appreciate the shout out with the Aaron Gordon piece. I remember reaching out and quoting you in that as well, and that was a great example of like maybe a little bit of a misfit role, asking him to do too much in Orlando, and then he lands in just the absolute perfect role. I compared it to like Sean Marion next to Steve Nash, like getting to play with Jokic as this just heliocentric superstar, supernova that creates everything for everyone, creates good looks, and really completes that offensive half court set, especially when Jamal and Jokic were thriving in the 2-man game and you have Gordon underneath in the dunker spot. Just a very clean fit for that play and something of a big wing stopper to pair with Jokic and defend the other team's best player, and then someone to just finish strong all the play finishes on that side. And, I would, you know, almost argue that in the draft itself that once you're done star hunting wherever that line is in that respective draft, that I think finding the guy that can slow down the opposing star becomes just as important as anything else, because a lot of people think like we have to target bucket getters at the top of the draft, but at a certain point you're targeting maybe a six man who only contributes offensively for 15 to 18 points a game instead of that starter star level scorer that's at 20, 25 or higher points a game. And finding guys that can slow down those guys becomes just as important when we're looking at two-way impact. And I think the playoffs show year after year that, contenders are good on both ends. There's very rarely, a team that's only like elite on one side of the ball. I I know like one fun fact was the top 12 or every champion since Shaq and Kobe Lakers are top 12 on both ends. Rudy Gobert was the 2013 draft, so you got there as well. So yeah, I think all of that's super important in kind of evaluating talents, trying to see what's the role they can translate to at the NBA level. Because a lot of the times we have ideas of what these roles are around superstars within certain schemes. And once you're building like out from your superstar, you're looking for specific skills that complement that star and have very few holes in the game around them so they don't get exploited in the playoffs, whether it's a starter or even a top 9 rotation guy going, going forward there. So in terms of kind of your writing process and your film watching process, what are you looking for a story, or to say like this guy will be a pro? I've seen him do this, this, and this 5 times now on film. Like that to me is what it takes for me to know that that skill is going to translate to the pros, and maybe you'll write about it or make a film breakdown of it, and what goes into that process.
Yeah, I think I mostly just try to write stories that people want to read. Is
Yeah.
the first thing, and then beyond that, I always have like an extensive like research portion before I start writing, where I try to read everything I can on the player, going back as far as I can, just like reading stories on their life, their career, their games, their teammates. Make a big notes document. Then I have a section for statistics. This is in a section for film. So sort of just like, biographical info, stats, and clips to try to like prove whatever point I'm going to make. And then just sort of start to base it out of there. And I use a lot of subheads when I write just as a way to stay organized, mostly because I think it's good for the readers. If you're going to like skim something, it's a little easier to do it when there's big subheads and you like know what you're getting into. So that's one thing I would say, just for like breakdowns like that. And then just trying to like chart my opinions year over year. Like one thing I do every season is a mock draft the day after the draft. So I know just like I've been doing this for like 11 years or something, right? And I have it to where at one point, like my number one pick in the early mock draft was Emmanuel Mudiay. And I did it one year with Cam Reddish. But like just tracking that, I think is just like important to see how guys develop and like where you think they're going to be at versus where they're eventually at. And also like if they have a disappointing year, you can sort of look back on that and maybe think, okay, what was the other context that went into it? Like, why didn't they meet, what was my evaluation of it wrong, which is oftentimes the case. Or sometimes, a guy is put in a situation that's just not advantageous for him. So I'd say those are like kind of a few things I try to do when I write, but mostly just look for storylines that I think are like going to come up again in the future, or just stuff people want to read.
Yeah, it's a great note on like reevaluating your draft process as you go. Like, obviously, it's not quite just shooting fish in a barrel like everyone thinks. I think it's more of like watch as much game on these prospects as you can. You get as much data as you can to make an educated decision. And at the end of the day, all those other factors come into play. Like, not everyone is a LeBron you can just drop in a franchise and he's now a 40-win team in that city. There's very few of those players, and things like the buzzwords are back: the role, the opportunity, the situation, the coach, the investment from the team, like who players around them, what their goals are. All these things are factors for their success, and it's not just raw talent that is going to carry a team. So like I've had good years evaluating. I think where I had Luca and Jaren Jackson, and was really high on Trey and Shea, and kill it, and maybe a little too high on Mo Bamba that year as well. But like Mikal Bridges, like I felt good about that lottery, and the Mobley, Scotty Barnes, Cade, Suggs lottery. I didn't quite have front side enough, but like that lottery. And then I have a Pat Will, Poku Okongwu lottery as well, where LaMelo and Ant were not quite as high as they should have been. So maybe looking back, maybe I prioritized defensive versatility in my mind, or that just general versatility over potential stars that should have been a little higher or something like that in terms of that. And then there's also the idea of like over what's the word just like overdoing that criticism of yourself, where like, for example, maybe I that same draft, I didn't know why exactly the Magic targeted Cole Anthony, because I had Poku higher on my board, but also Tyrese Maxey and Desmond Bain were right there as well. And I thought Cole kind of replaced DJ Augustine at the time as a nice six man for that roster who had just made the playoffs. Like, he was a good short term fit, but I thought these other guys had a little higher potential, and I wasn't necessarily, after short term fit. And then I turn around and maybe rank Trey Mann a little higher the next time around, because I really like that, kind of similar scoring burst with the quick burst, the scoring touch, pull up shooting, and like they're fun rotation players, but are they worth lottery picks if they're ultimately maybe six men in the league? That could be kind of, it all comes down to the draft class and who's available, but these are factors where you're kind of go back and forth and trying to find the right line to stick to. And shout out Todd Whitehead and his stat and his incredible data viz work. He's my favorite data viz guy on Twitter. He's now with Synergy, doing a whole lot of data analytics with them. And his fun fact stat was 44 of the last 45 NBA champions going back to 1980 have had a top 7 regular season rank in either offense or defensive rating, with neither of them worse than 18. So all of them were top 18 on both sides of the ball. And top 7 on one side of the ball. And, that just kind of goes to show even further that you got to play both ends at an average or elite rate as a team to make it through the playoffs. And that's kind of been, a criticism for me of, like, say, the Phoenix Suns, where they're clearly going to get buckets. They have some of the toughest shot makers, high volume, efficient scorers in the league with Booker and Durant. And now they add Beal. But are they just getting buckets? Are they trading buckets? Are they going to get any stops with that group? Have they surrounded them with enough defense to kind of like win both sides of the floor and actually come out as a net positive? Or are they just trying to trade buckets? And that's kind of what I've been hoping to see eventually from that team. And we'll see if they get there this year. But that's always kind of been a criticism of mine for them. But at the end of the day, that's kind of the core of the roster building philosophy for me is, building two-way impact, winning players, two-way versatility, few holes in their game. And obviously you want all the mental added aspects of, like, they play the right way. They look for the open teammate. They are willing to hustle and play hard for their team, for the guy next to them in the huddle. And obviously you got to have talent and surround that talent with those type of guys. And so that kind of brings me to the Bulls itself. And, that's your team up there. You've been covering them for a while. What do you make of this season, and kind of where do you think the next steps are for the Bulls as the trade deadline is only a couple months out here?
The Bulls love mediocrity. They refuse to try hard enough to win at the highest levels. I think, they've paid the luxury tax one time, and it was sort of on accident in like 20 years. And they refuse to tank because they don't want to be really bad, because they think that's an insult to the game, an insult to the fans. Never mind the fact that Chicago is a crazy basketball city, and the Bulls will get support just as sort of like a 90s nostalgia brand, regardless of how good or bad they are. So that's just the Bulls. They love to be mired in mediocrity. They never really want to go for it to try to win. They don't want to spend enough money to win, and they don't want to, tank ever. So they're stuck in this endless cycle where they will never be any good. With that being said, it does feel like entering this season was the perfect time to reset it, because you had the opportunity where it's like, all right, you have this top 10 protected Spurs pick out the window. Let's try to keep that pick, especially after you do the Caruso for Giddey trade, especially after, you let DeRozan go to the Kings. But the Bulls blew it before the season even started when they couldn't get rid of Zach LaVine or Nikola Vucevic. And both those guys are good players, but from a certain vantage point, it does feel like they kind of got screwed by the new CBA with LaVine. I think, they signed LaVine under the old CBA. If it was still the former CBA, I think they would have had a much easier time trading LaVine. And now the luxury tax is more punitive. Teams are more worried about taking on super high salaried players. So there's really been almost nothing on the LaVine front in terms of trade rumors until that Michael Porter Jr. rumor popped up a couple weeks ago. So they've just sort of been stuck with him playing out the string. And, well, LaVine's had a great year. Nikola Vucevic has had an incredible year, his best season maybe of his career, or at least since the season without fans, where he was shooting 45% for your Magic, and the Bulls just did an outstanding job rebuilding Orlando. I mean, they refused to rebuild themselves, but they really nailed it in terms of rebuilding the Magic, so you're welcome. And yeah, they're just sort of trapped in this endless cycle of mediocrity that it feels like the only way they can escape is to truly get lucky. Billy Donovan's been a great coach this year. I think he's been like the one winner on this season where he's got them to buy into a new style. They're playing at the fastest pace in the league. They've been dead last in three-point rate, I think, each of the last 3 years. They're either 29th or 30th each of the last 3 years in three-point rate. But this year, I think they're top 5. They're top 10 in three-point percentage. And the Bulls are proving that the team that makes the most threes does not win every NBA game, because the Bulls still kind of suck, even though they rip a lot of threes, play fast, and play a relatively pleasing style, as long as you don't want to focus too much on the defensive end. So it's been a frustrating season, and it's like the best case scenario is they'll end with the 8th pick in the draft, because That's just sort of where the Bulls are comfortable. And then, you would think tries, to tear it down this year. Well, they can't tear it down because they refuse to, or they're just not like skilled enough at doing it. But you would think tear it down this year, super tank next year in the Boozer, DeBonta, Darren Peterson draft, and then that's all you really got to do. Like if you have Bazelis, whoever you draft in 25, whoever you draft in 26, I don't need it to be like a 10-year tank. Like you can just you're going to be bad anyway this year. And then next year, I mean, we'll see. Levine and Vucevic are still under contract. Are those guys going to be on the team? Will they finish the season on this team? As a Bulls fan, the most disappointing day of the year every season is the trade deadline because they always need to do something and they can never do anything. Just constant inactivity around the trade deadline every year. I feel like I have a full blown meltdown on my Bulls podcast, Cash Considerations, every season when the trade deadline passes. So it's the same thing again this year. Like the hopes and dreams of the franchise are tied up in the Bulls nailing the trade deadline. And Arturas Karnisovas just isn't good enough at this. And there's already ample evidence that this guy should be fired. And they should just let someone else try to rebuild the team because he has not showed an ability to do it. So that's kind of where the Bulls are. Not a lot of hope to be a Bulls fan. As a Chicago Bears fan and a Chicago White Sox fan, I know quite a bit about not having any hope for your favorite sports teams. And the Bulls have the best brand of the three, but they just refuse to do anything with it. So, been a tough season. But honestly, like the players on the team are still very easy to root for. And the team has played a fun style this year. So at least there's that, I guess. But, the hopes of the Bulls pulling off a rebuild like the Rockets, like the Magic, dare I say the Thunder, I mean, that's just never going to happen because they won't commit to it.
Yeah, it seems to be a lot of similar sentiment from Bulls fans around NBA Twitter. My heart goes out to all of you that are diehard fans. You're watching the games, and nothing seems to change. I feel like the Magic were not far away from that position a few years back, kind of also with Vucevic, and I'll try to be as nice as I can to Vucevic here, and say that he's clearly has an offensive skill set of tough shot making near the rim, like soft touch finishing. If he's left open, he's shooting lights out from pick and pop.
Dude, he's got a 68% true shooting this year, and I think he's shooting like 46% or
It
something.
might be his best year ever,
Yeah,
especially in terms of that offensive efficiency, like you said. I mean, it's no doubt. And the nicest way I can say it is like maybe the Warriors with the trade idea of putting him next to Draymond, like a defensive anchor to kind of cover up the other side of the ball and, fit into a system where they really kind of maybe use him in that Kevin Love Cavs type of a role where there's a lot of catch and shoot threes, a lot of rebounds, and maybe a post up mismatch here and there. And obviously a little more open playing off of Steph's gravity. Like, maybe that's the role for him because I'm not a guy that necessarily thinks he brings a ton of winning impact to playoff series basketball, but he's going to get his 17-7 in the first half, and then maybe a few more, hit a few threes through the game. But shout out to the Bulls, and good luck to him. I hope he does have success. It's just I went through watching that for 7 years as well, so I feel your pain on that end. And with Levine, I really think like you said, the cap rules really screwed the Bulls with that because I think he's underrated in the sense of like his tough shot making scoring ability, and it's almost the thing with Vucevic as well for me is like it's a little easier to hide maybe a negative defender in the backcourt with front court length.
yeah.
And that being said, the Bulls were able to do it with Caruso and Lonzo with trying to hide Vucevic in that sense. Like he was a part of a good defense with those guys for that span when they were all together and healthy. He was a part of a good defense with Aaron Gordon and Isaac in the front court back in Orlando when they made the playoffs. So like it has worked in terms of the defensive rating being high. It's just for me, it's a little easier to hide like a supernova guard that shoots with a bunch of defensive versatility and length around him versus the position that's supposed to be your defensive anchor and hoping everyone else can cover it up with no one behind them to kind of bring that help defense. So that's kind of what my mind always comes back to with that. But with Levine, like I think he's one of the most underrated scorers in the league, and that contract is where the conversation gets muddy because he can hit as many tough shots, pull up threes, fade. Like I love the way that his shot release is so unblockable because he's like fading on every shot. He gets such a high shot release point with pull up jumpers. I know against like Boston the other day, he was like almost. I don't know if I would say he was hunting Derek White, but he was looking for switches to get Derek White on him. I think because of that height advantage and just the shot release point, like he knew he could get his shot up anytime and D White was contesting him over and over, and he was just hitting pull up three after pull up three, contested shots, drawing switches on like a horns, a double drag, a couple rescreen pick and rolls. So like he's clearly a gifted offensive weapon, and that contract is what it comes down to find a trade. It's too bad. And now I don't know if why the Bulls would necessarily do this, but in terms of the Denver Nuggets rumors, like I think being able to swap Jamal for Levine would be what they want to do because if you give up Porter, you're giving up one of your best rebounders and defenders in the front court, shot blockers next to Jokic, who spreads the floor as a catch and shoot guy for another guard with if you're pairing him with Jamal and then Jokic down low and all you kind of have is like Gordon and this young group of guard defenders. I just don't know if there's enough left defensively to get them over the hump. But I don't necessarily know if that's something the Bulls would have any reason to want to do to just kind of flip one bad contract for another. Maybe the change of scenery would be enough. And Jamal hasn't really been great either to actually like Levine's producing at least like, as well as he possibly could as a max level scorer. And Jamal is not for, a couple months, if not longer now. So I don't know if that's necessarily the framework of a great deal. And it makes sense for the Bulls to want MPJ as kind of a young piece in return. But, the back injury stuff, like you really have to believe there's more potential there, like as a scorer with his versatility. And, I'm not sure. Maybe he is almost maximized next to Jokic in the catch and shoots and the closeouts and the defense and rebounding role that he's found. Because Porter has shown development over the years, like a little bit more as a playmaker, a little bit more as a defender, a little more efficient. But, would he blossom into an all-star with the ball in his hands and no one else there? I don't know. That's kind of what the bet would be. So, what do you make of these Nuggets rumors and
Yeah.
where ultimately do you think Levine and Vucevic end up, if anywhere, this year?
Yeah, to me, one of the biggest storylines in the league, maybe the biggest, is that Jamal Murray just kind of stinks now. And it happened right after the All-Star break last year. He had like a knee strain or something. And before that, the Nuggets were like ripping off wins and it looked like they were poised to win another championship, quite frankly. And he came back and he was just not really the same in the playoffs at all. He still had some like moments in the playoffs against the Lakers and he had a couple good games later in the playoffs, but in general, he wasn't able to turn it up the way we've seen him do a couple other times in his career. And then he stunk in the Olympics. And, this year, I feel like he's been getting a little better lately, maybe, but he just hasn't had a great year. So, of course, I agree that, like, as a Zach LaVine fan, a longtime Zach LaVine fan, I do think that putting him with Jokic could just be awesome. Like, could really, you can't think of a better superstar for Zach to play with than Jokic, who could just set him up. And, one issue for Zach is that he's never been a primary creator, and he's been miscast as that on the Bulls just because he's the best player on the team. But really, like, what he's really good at is spot up shooting and getting to the rim. And if he could maximize him playing off Jokic, you would think that that could be a really devastating tandem. At the same time, though, for the Nuggets, like, they won a championship with Murray and Porter, and like there's like a proof of concept there where Levine's a lifetime loser. He's been stuck on bad teams, but like what's he played in, like 5 playoff? He's won 1 playoff game his entire career, so like sort of takes a leap of faith to do that. For the Bulls, I just like if you're trading Levine, you want picks and cap flexibility, and if they do this Nuggets trade, they're getting neither of those things. So. Porter Jr. turns 27. I would argue Porter Jr. is the bigger injury risk than Levine. even though, Levine's had his fair share of durability issues. Michael Porter Jr. has actually been an Iron Man lately. I looked this up. He's played like 95 of the last 96 games or something crazy like that. But, he's got to play with a brace on his foot. He has drop foot where he can't even lift his foot up without, help from this brace. And I really think, like, I watch Porter a lot. I wrote a bunch of Porter stories when he was in high school. From the McDonald's All-American game, from going on an EYBL trip. I saw Michael Porter Jr. and Trae Young play Jason Tatum in high school in Lexington, Kentucky. And I think it was their senior, so probably Porter's junior year, rising junior year, and Tatum's rising senior year. And back then, nobody would have said Trae Young was going to be the better NBA player than Michael Porter Jr. I mean, MPJ was the guy. But he's just not the same athlete anymore because his body started to break down. And really, it's a huge testament to him that he's still been able to carve out this type of career, despite the fact that he's got a bad back and bad feet. So from a certain perspective, I have a lot of respect for what MPJ has been able to do. But it was similar to like when the Bulls got Giddey. There was a popular narrative around town in Chicago that like, well, Josh Giddey was not in a position to succeed on the Thunder last year, and now he's going to the Bulls. He'll be able to handle the ball. It's like, guys, first of all, the Thunder are a good organization, and the Bulls are a bad organization. So that's the first thing you need to keep in mind. Secondarily, off the top of my head, I'm going to say the Thunder were like first or second in three-point percentage last year, whereas the Bulls were like the most three-point hesitant team in the league before this season. And Giddey, as has been expected, still like struggles with the same things Josh Giddey has always struggled with if you put the ball in his hands. And the reason he wasn't playing with the ball in his hands in Oklahoma City is because there's a very high bar you have to meet as a lead creator to be able to do that in the NBA. Josh Giddey doesn't necessarily meet that bar. So yeah, I just wonder, like, if you take Porter Jr. outside of Denver, I just can't envision a scenario in which that's good for him. And like he takes a big step up not playing with Jokic. It's like he doesn't have much shot creation ability off the dribble at this point in his career. Certainly he has less shot creation ability than Levine. And he's currently playing with the best shot creator in the world who can like set him up from any angle on any play type whenever, with eyes in the back of his head. So I don't really know why the Bulls would do that trade. I've kind of gone through the full gamut of emotions since it came out. When it first came out, I'm like, wow, they might actually do a Zach LaVine trade. This is crazy. And the more I think about it, the more I dislike it. But it does seem like a very Arturas Karnisovas trade to me. Like the same way he did the Caruso for Giddey trade, and you sell the city on the fact that, oh, we're getting younger, we'll have the bigger player if they trade for Porter Jr. over Levine, but it's like, all right, get DeAndre Ayton and RJ Barrett next. I know Barrett's had a really nice couple of years for Toronto, but just because you're young and have some physical traits doesn't necessarily mean that you're destined for stardom. And I think that ship has certainly sailed for Michael Porter Jr. at this point. So, I just don't know what the Bulls would really be getting out of that deal. But I'm the same guy who's been banging the table on them to trade Levine for 3 years. So, part of me feels like if they do it, at least this chapter of the organization's closed.
Yeah, and it's like, selling the team on potential of like miscast guys around the league or something like that, instead of just the potential of the draft that's sitting right in front of them.
Yeah.
And how they could just, I know there are a few like teams that I would almost say are more small market that just don't want to miss the playoffs. Like their goal is that 7 seed every year. Whether it's to sell a few playoff home tickets, whether it's just to be relevant, whether it's just to say they made the playoffs, like for whatever reason, making the playoffs is more important than ultimately winning the playoffs or building a contender that has a shot to win it all every year. And, sometimes it has as much to do with directive from ownership as it does the actual, front office in place doing it. And I know, that's why you'll see like smart front offices take advantage of those front offices that are trying to, make a win now push to move up from 9th to 7th instead of, take their time and build a sustainable contender over time, like you might see the Thunder do and some of the other teams that you mentioned. So, hopefully they find something that works and find Levine and Vucevic a home here and just dip their toes in the tanking waters for a year or two. When you got these great classes, especially like you mentioned, Boozer, Devonta, Darren coming up, and really a whole lottery full of just potential stars that somebody could pop up and really be an exciting talent. Like that's the year to do it. And especially with all these other factors you mentioned with the protected pick and some of the other guys from the recent team with Caruso and DeRozan out the door now, like it's time to just dabble in the tanking just a little bit, guys, over in Chicago.
Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.
So, speaking of the draft, I thought we might hit on some of the rising prospects that could hear their name called pretty early in the 2025 NBA draft with Jeremiah Fears and Kasparas Jakucionis. And we could start with Fears, and both of these guys have kind of hopped into draft circles as like maybe the third pick after Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper. So, what stands out to you about Fears that is causing such a rise in the draft boards?
Yeah, well, he's just been really good at a super young age. I think he turned 18 in October, and he reclassified the same way Flagg did. And there's a lot of really young guys in this draft. Ace Bailey's really young. Flagg's super duper young, not turning 18 until December recently. And then Fears is really young too. So I think Fears is, the best thing you could do as an NBA prospect or as a college player to put your name on the map in the NBA is to just perform really well at a really young age against good competition. And Fears, for the most part, has done that. Now, he hasn't gotten into conference play yet. Oklahoma's played a bit of a soft schedule. But when they played a pretty good Michigan team, he looked spectacular, winning the game on a 4-point play, consistently generating free throws. So, yeah, I just think, big picture take, has this draft class been a little disappointing so far? And, maybe that's a natural question to ask every year because it's like the new car versus used car thing. It always looks better until you drive it off the lot and until you see the deficiencies of some of the players in the class. But I would say Flagg has been good, and I still have total belief in Flagg as someone who's going to be an awesome NBA player. But he's had a bit of a disappointing freshman year to this point, mostly because he hasn't shot the ball well, I would say. But I still think Flagg's amazing and the clear number one player in this draft. Dylan Harper's been phenomenal and has really solidified himself as the number 2, and that was kind of an open question coming into the season. But then beyond that, it's like, okay, how are you rounding out this top 5? Especially when Ace Bailey, I would say, has shown the tendencies, continued to show the tendencies he's shown throughout his prep career to the start of his season at Rutgers. I enjoy watching Ace Bailey. Ace Bailey just never really surveys the floor to pass. He is a truly one-track mind to get buckets, which salute to him. But so you just look for other guys in this class who can pop, and I think Fears and Kasparas Jakucionis are the two that to me that look really good. So I guess what do I like about Fears? Just his production at a young age is the first thing. He just hits a lot of the statistical markers you want to when you just look at the data. Super high free throw rate, really high steal rate, super high assist rate, high true shooting percentage, plays with a lot of usage, scores efficiently, gets the ball to his teammates. He hasn't shot the ball really well, but he just looks so comfortable shooting that I think he's going to be a shooter long term. I mean, I don't really know where you can eventually peg him at, but to me, he looks like he has a projectable shot, and certainly his ceiling, the ceiling for a lot of these guys, but especially for Fears, will probably come down to how good of a pull-up shooter he becomes, because that's just especially if you're going to play with the ball in your hands, that's just one thing that can really take you over the top. But and then just from the eye test, I think he passes the eye test pretty easily too. Is not a huge guard, but has good size. Is a guard. If this was 2010, we'd be calling him a big guard. But it seems like the ball handlers get bigger every year. Just pretty tight ball handling ability. He's not like a crazy above the rim athlete, but I think that he can like get in and out of his dribble combos pretty quickly while like keeping his momentum. That's one reason why he's able to get to the foul line. He's a decent finisher, even though I'm sure that'll be a question, like how he finishes over NBA length. And he just looks really comfortable. I think like he rarely gets sped up as a ball handler. Even when he has some turnover issues, it seems like they're turnovers caused by like trying to make a play versus like getting caught in no man's land or being sloppy with the ball. So I think Jeremy Fears looks really good. I would be tempted to put him in my top 5 right now as this class, continues to develop. But yeah, like obviously if he's gonna play with the ball in his hands primarily, like that's just such a high bar to clear in the NBA. Like you have to be like such a freak to be able to do that. So it'll be interesting. I do think that he does have some off-ball potential too, just as another guard who could handle the ball and provide some shooting. But what have you seen from him? And do you think like, am I hyping him up too much? I know I wrote a story on him already. And so what are your sort of like, do you have any hesitations with him moving forward?
So, like you said, the first thing that stands out in a positive way for Fears is that first step burst, that acceleration, the gas pedal. Like he gets downhill and he gets there fast. He attacks the gaps, and he looks like he's in full control, body control, ball control, like quick dribbler, weaves through traffic, hunts contact, draws fouls at a high rate, and he's just constantly beating people off the dribble and getting to the rim, drawing fouls that way. And then he's also hitting tough shots. Like he's pulling up for 3. You mentioned the game-winning 4-point play versus Michigan where he finishes with 30 points, 4 assists, 3 boards, a steal, and 3 threes, shooting efficiently from the field and at the free throw line. And just shows a lot to like there. And yeah, I mean, like you said, it's kind of a high bar to have the ball in your hand at the next level. Like you have to pretty much be the number 1 option, number 2 option, maybe a 6-man who's only trying to provide a spark. So I think that's, probably at least a good floor for him, but obviously that's not what you're drafting in the top 5. If you view him as a top 5 pick, you're building an offense around him and think that's the guy that you're going to build, the future around. And, he's led Oklahoma to a 12-0 undefeated record. You mentioned all the positive marks, like statistically and in his game. And I don't think I've seen enough to have a negative view of him quite yet. And the only thing that comes to mind is like, will he be able to defend his own position and the guard position at a positive level in the pros because of his size? And that's always kind of, the last bar for me of like, will he be a 6-man ultimately, or will he be a starter or even, a potential star scorer? Is like if he's averaging 18 in the pros and can't really defend, he might be more of a 6-man. If he breaks that 20, 25-point barrier and defends well, then he can clearly be a starter with potential to be, a real star scorer in this league. And, I think he shows a lot offensively that you want to see as a scorer, a bucket getter, and you mentioned some of the shooting touch and the free throw percentage that are nice indicators for his shooting development. Like he's not shooting lights out or anything like that at this point, but those are all positive signs that he'll get there, especially when he's already taking tough threes, step back threes, pull up threes, and hitting them in big moments. I think those are good signs when it's not just like an open catch and shoot 3, high percentage, and that kind of thing. So. I think there's a lot of reasons for beliefs. And in the draft class in general, I think it's fair to say it's disappointed expectations because it's been touted as this, huge draft class. And maybe, the Ace Baileys, the Nolan Traores have fallen down a little bit on their draft stock because of how they played this year, and which in turn has opened up the avenue for Jeremiah Fears to jump up into a top 5, or Kasparas Jakucionis or a Derik Queen, putting up these huge numbers. I'm a big Ace of Newell fan. I think, as we talked about Aaron Gordon before, I think he could be one of these like star stoppers, this guys that can slow down another opposing star with active hands, defensive versatility, and still bring some strong play finishing, dirty work on both ends. Like clearly will have a role to me at the next level of like defense on the wing, big wing defense, play finishing, can pick and roll to the rim a little bit, nice footwork in the post against a mismatch. And like to me, there's a clearly defined role for him at the next level. And it just kind of depends on how you view the rest of the talent, how early you're going to draft that role. Like if you don't see any more stars, maybe he goes as high as 4 or 5. If you think there's 15 potential stars in this draft, then maybe he falls to outside the lottery. That's how wide this draft feels, and it brings me back a little bit to the Aaron Gordon's actual draft with Julius Randle and Marcus Smart, and obviously Embiid, Wiggins, Jabari at the top, where it's like deep with NBA talent, but it's kind of not a clear order of where these guys are going to get picked because there's so much like different ranges of talent where you start to kind of everyone gets touted as a potential star and maybe clearly will be an NBA player, but maybe not everyone is actually a potential star. Maybe they fall somewhere in between into good starters. Maybe they're after a defensive player of the year or a defensive type of all defensive team with a couple guys and clearly loaded with talent. But they're, like you said as well, it's a super young draft in this year, so things can change. Guys can get better. They can develop different ways, and you're betting on potential. And so, I think the top of the draft, you bet on potential stardom. And at a certain point, if you don't see a potential star, you need to find good basketball players. And there's a different line in every draft where that starts. And, it's up to you if you want to take a swing for a guy because you think he can be an offensive hub or an elite scorer in this league. Like you said, you got to be really special on the ball to be able to do something like that. So, I think back to Fears, I think he shows enough traits to think he can be a good scorer in this league for sure. And it really comes down to your defensive evaluation of him, like whether or not he'll be a starter or more of a bench scorer. But, the league has trended to being more offensively open and maybe more, or I should say open to like giving offensive guys more of a chance, I guess, and kind of gambling on that potential earlier in the draft. Like, scouts would rather find the guy that's going to drop 20 a game than the guy that's going to get a stop every once in a while, like whether it's more exciting or a lot of people just think buckets are what the league's all about. So I think being able to, evaluate the difference between a winning player and a bucket getter is big during the draft process. So, I personally will probably, I don't have my big board set, but like I definitely am higher on Fears than I, was before. He's had a killer start to the season. I think he'll, deserve lottery consideration for sure. Like I'll probably have him ranked in that range. And same for Kasparas, who we're going to talk about as well. But we can shift over to Kasparas in a second. I have a few more stats on Fears just from Synergy's 0.9 points per possession on 62 pick and roll ball handler plays per total, 65th percentile. He scores 1.3 PPP in transition 48 times this year, 79th percentile. 0.8 points per possession on spot ups and 1.05 points per possession on ISOs. What stands out for Fears to me is that quick first step burst, that gas pedal, being able to just decelerate on a dime, finish at the rim, hit maybe a spinning counter midi, hit some elbow midi pull-ups, hit the 3-point pull-ups, and then just basically be able to beat anyone. And I think that's an underrated thing where, like, if you have, like, just a handful of clear NBA-level advantages and that quick first step burst is one of them, like, you should be able to create your own shot at any point. Now, whether you make that shot, whether you actually finish at the rim, that's a different story. Like, Jaden Ivey comes to mind, or even Scoot Henderson in recent drafts where, like, these guys clearly have an elite quick first step. Now, will it translate to the entire basketball picture? That's to be determined. We've seen Jaden Ivey take a little bit of a leap with more touches. But I think having that NBA level advantage, like if you're elite at one thing among NBA players, that's something you can build off of. So, like, if you can get past your defender, you're penetrating the paint, you can get to the rim, and you can kick out for threes. And maybe you can draw fouls too on your way there. So if you can rack up fouls, improve your finishing at the rim, and have the vision to kick out on those driving kicks, you can be in an NBA rotation, especially when you add up all the ancillary scoring and that Fears is able to do. And so jumping to Kasparas Jakucionis at Illinois, he's making a name for himself. That mean step back left wing triple, it seems to be a signature move for him now. He's putting up 17 points, rounding up a little, six boards, 6 assists, 1 steal per game, 47% from the field, 42% from three, 86% on free throws. And I caught some of his games recently against Arkansas and Tennessee, where they almost upset the number 1 team in the country, but not quite. And Arkansas had a lot of impressive talent, and then he showed off a lot of impressive moves as well. I really like his Euro step footwork, his deceleration control, and that left wing 3-point shot seems to be like his kill shot. Like when in doubt, almost like if you imagine Luka Doncic kill shot, like he's taking it in that same spot, and like he seems pretty comfortable getting to that move as well. So he's one of the most exciting prospects in the entire draft class. He's another name that could find himself called very early, maybe another top 5 pick, like as high as 3 on draft night. And the lottery is crazy sometimes. These guys could fall maybe as far as 10 or 15 as well. But just the idea that he's mentioned this high means like he could, depending on the situation, he can be considered at that 3rd, 4th, 5th pick. And a lot of it is from how impressive he's been at the collegiate level. And there's guys that it's an interesting conversation, like international guys now coming to the college ranks. Is that good for their stock? Is it bad for their stock? We've seen it kind of both ways for different prospects. So, what do you think he's done to kind of earn this top 5 status, and your thoughts on, NBA prospects that might be on an international pro team, like a Ben Seraph or Seraph, I'm not sure how to say the last name there, like where he stayed over there and he shows incredible passing skills, but maybe it's a smaller role in a more competitive league and a little harder to show all his NBA level type skills if he's asked to do very specific things. So, what's your thoughts on kind of the international game now merging with NCAA, especially with the NIL deals that are growing and creating opportunities there in terms of getting the most out of your draft stock as an NBA draft prospect?
Yeah, I think playing international definitely makes it a trickier evaluation. And I say this as someone who really liked Killian Hayes back in that draft. So it's just like tougher to like know the context and to know the roles and to even like get all the biographical information. But the basketball is just such an international game. It's always going to be that way going forward. Many of the best talents entering the league are international talents. So I think that you have to treat it, with as much respect as college, or more so. Certainly, like when you bring up Luka and what he was doing in EuroLeague, and while people were wondering if Luka Doncic could score in the ACC, it just seems like totally ridiculous now, right? In terms of Kasparas, I saw him live against Northwestern. He had that was a game where he was just ripping step back threes pretty much the entire game. I want to say he only had like 1 bucket inside the arc. I think just like the sales pitch on him in general is like, he's a big point guard. How big is he? That's what I really want to see. I stood next to him after the game. I'm very short. I'm 5'6". So it's tough for me to be like, to eyeball him and be like, oh, he's 6'4" and not 6'6". But he didn't really strike me as 6'6". I guess we'll see when the tape measure gets put up to him. So that's sort of like one thing I think could play a role in the stock is just his size. But obviously he has good size for a point guard, if not great size. And just been a hyper efficient scorer with high usage. I mean, when you see that, it's just super intriguing, I think. And I think he's got 65% true shooting right now, like you said, 42% from 3. My question with him is, can he score inside the arc? And if you can't consistently score inside the arc, finish over NBA length, do you really get to demand high usage as a ball handler? So I really like him. I think that, I would probably have him 3rd right now, mostly because he's just been super productive at a young age against a very tough schedule. Illinois has played a lot of good opponents in the non-con portion of the slate. So Like you said, it seems like every time he can get a big on the switch on the ball screen, he's just going straight into that step back left jumper. And he's a really good shooter. He's seemed like a phenomenal shooter to this point. He's one of those guys who I trust more as a shooter on the pull up rather than a catch and shoot, which is rare, but I think we've all seen those guys over the years. The first one that comes to mind for me is James Harden, where like his brain can't even let him take a spot up. Like he needs to like pump fake once, dribble, and then shoot. And I'm not saying that Kasparas is to that level, but to me, he just seems more comfortable shooting off the dribble than shooting on a catch and shoot, which, you know, if he's going to hit his maximum outcome as a player, he's going to be playing with the ball in his hands a lot. That pull-up shot gives him, you know, a certain floor that he's not going to be Josh Giddey if he's just like a tall pass first point guard. Like that is a shot that will have utility at the highest levels of the game, right? Just like being able to create it for himself, being able to shoot with range, and making it an efficient shot on a really difficult look just gives him a certain floor. And then you just factor in his size and his passing, and I think he's a really creative passer. He's probably got the best vision in this class. Is that I guess I'm not thinking too hard about it right now, but I'm just winging that take. Best vision in the class. Maybe Ben Suraf does or someone else. Feel free to hit me up and tell me I'm wrong when the listeners check out this podcast. But phenomenal vision. Certainly can get sloppy with the ball. I think just because he's sort of below the NBA threshold of athleticism for a guard, that's a bit scary. That's why I think his size really matters. Like if you want to compare him to Luka, like he's just not going to be as good of an inside the arc scorer as Luka. And then like Luka's like an 11 out of 10 vision guy and passer. And it's just unfair to compare anyone to that. But you can kind of see the rough outline of how Kasparas could have NBA utility in like sort of a like less amazing version of, you know, some of the skills that Luka brings. So that's the first thing. Also, I just don't think he's going to be a good defender. Like I watched the Northwestern North Shore kids sort of like body him on screens, and he couldn't really get around him. And he's just like not a high level run and jump athlete. But you're drafting him for his size, his playmaking, his pull up shooting, and the fact that he's been a super efficient scorer. You know, regardless of if I think he has trouble scoring from 2-point range, it's like, I don't know, he's got 65% true shooting. So what am I really complaining about? And he's been able to get to the foul line a lot because he's really strong. Just as a ball handler, like he's for an 18-year-old, he's like pretty jacked. He'll probably add more muscle, I would guess, as he goes on, and could be someone who's like a strength-based creator more so than a speed-based creator if you're just evaluating it out 3 or 5 years from now, you know? So I think he looks really good. It was cool to see him live. Hopefully I'll be able to check him out live again one more time this year at least. And yeah, I would probably have him 3 right now.
Yeah, and I looked it up while you were talking. He is literally better on pull-up jump shots than catch and shoots via synergy. Oh. He's 17 of 19 on pull-up threes. 17. He's missed 19. So 17 of 36 on pull-up threes, 47% on pull-up threes right now. And then he's only 6 of 19 on catch and shoot threes, so 31% on catch and shoot threes at the moment. So that quite literally much better pulling up for 3 than stand still off ball catch and shoots. And you know, like you said, I think what impresses me beyond the step back 3 is his craftiness and kind of that like fundamental footwork driving through the paint. Because like you said, he's not like a naturally explosive athlete that's just gonna beat you with one fake one way and drive to the rim unburdened the other way. Like he's gonna take his time. He's gonna maybe put you in a hostage dribble behind him. He's gonna throw a bunch of counter footwork at you where maybe he'll spin one way, spin back the other way. Good finisher at the rim from what a couple of the games that I saw. Like he was hitting like high off the glass finger rolls. And, you know, I think the positives, like you mentioned, like being able to counter the drive with a step back 3, like go-to shot, being able to get into the paint through fundamental footwork, even if it's at kind of a slower pace, like he draws fouls that way. He's strong going to the rim. He can finish at the rim, but can obviously improve as well. And then the playmaking out of that paint penetration, like there's a bit of an offensive hub there. And then you kind of know going in, like you said, like the offensive athletic advantages, or really on both ends, are not there. Like the defensive athleticism is not there. It might, I don't know if it'll be non-existent or if it'll just be not much impact, but like you would hope he can kind of reach average impact for his position is the goal for anyone, to really be able to kind of stay on the floor come playoff time. Yeah. But, you know, I think the offense alone, especially in this class, like there's enough like tangible things that you can say, like he can be a drive and kick scoring creator. He can create his own shot, draw fouls, finish at the rim, and kick out of the paint. Like there's enough there offensively to think there's a hub there. And those things, especially with the fundamental like footwork, playing at his own pace, that's where he's obviously not as tall as Franz Wagner, but he reminds me a little bit of the controlling his own pace as Franz, with able to use the high ball screen to get into the paint, counter with the footwork a little bit, maybe hit some tough finishes at the rim, and then also have that step back 3-point shot. So, you know, not that that's a comp, but that's just kind of someone that pops to mind watching him play, and how obviously Franz is 6'10" doing those things. So, you know, that's a big difference as well, to make up for maybe lack of that natural like run jump athleticism, like you mentioned. But can definitely kind of see some of those offensive skills translate. And he's at 0.83 pick and roll ball handler, points per possession, 69 times this year in the 58th percentile, and still 1.2 on spot ups, only about 23 possessions, 85th percentile. But a guy that's better, even better, like he has good shooting numbers, and somehow even better pull up shooting numbers than the off ball catch and shoot. So, you know, that all good signs for his kind of potential. He has good numbers, offensive efficiency, and along with the touch at the rim, I think are also all good signs for potential development as a 3-point shooter. So, you know, I think either of these guys could go as high as 3. And given how kind of like uncertain this lottery is, like all it takes is one team to talk themselves into them or somebody else, where, you know, I don't know where a Derik Queen might end up, but he's been, you know, crushing it at this level. And he's a very interesting talent where, you know, he could do a lot as an offensive hub, but like if there's not much shooting and the defense is, you know, not clear as well there, you know, that's investing in a big that might be a handoff hub and a downhill kind of force. To me, it reminds me of watching like Julius Randle, but without the tough shot making. And I don't know if that's like a star you bet a top 5 pick on necessarily, but like I really like.
I was seeing 6'9" Boogie Cousins.
There you go. That works too. And like there's a lot to like. It's just like kind of you kind of have to wear rose-colored glasses with some of these guys to kind of hope like if everything goes right, that's the star we're drafting. And I was talking to Eric Wise on the podcast, and he kind of hit on like at a certain point, you shouldn't just be star hunting every single time in the draft. Like it should also be about finding good basketball players who can contribute to winning on both ends of the floor. And at a certain point, you can't just star hunt all through the lottery. Like there aren't going to be 15 stars every draft. You'd be lucky if there's 2 or 3. If you're not picking in the top 3 and you're really talking yourself into a guy, maybe it's better to just take the good basketball player that contributes to winning. But you know, I really appreciate you hopping on the pod today, Ricky. It's been a blast talking hoops. Always down to talk hoops anytime, and you know, always fun talking about college and more so the draft prospect pipeline from youth to the NBA. So thanks for taking the time, Ricky. Can't wait to do it again sometime.
For sure. Thanks for having me, man.
No doubt. Have a good one.